So, Jade, tell me how you define emotional intelligence.
That's a big one. I mean, it's a lot. I would say emotional intelligence is a process that is kind of evolves. So there's several steps to it. Step one, when we're kids, is emotional regulation. Like when you're throwing a temper tantrum as a child, your parents are like, "This is not the time or the place. You need to regulate your emotions." So you learn that fairly early on. You also learn emotional appropriateness fairly early on as a child. So I think that's a big part of emotional maturity. Mm-hmm. And then we start getting into, all right, so now we're regulated emotionally and we know when to express emotions, the appropriate response of emotions. But then we get into, okay, how do we know what we're feeling? So that would be like emotional integrity. And how do we express what we're feeling? Emotional vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then I think the final one might be what we might call emotional alchemy, like an advanced emotional maturity response, which is the ability to take an emotion, know that it might not be appropriate or know that it may not be useful, and turn it into an emotion that is useful. Like an emotion like anger, you can turn that into drive and motivation, which is a far more appropriate and useful emotion.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you then, when you're in relationships, because I know this is something that is really important for you and your girlfriends talk about it a lot, and it's, a thing that I think comes up a lot for women when we talk about men, that men seem to get the rap that they're not very good with emotions. And I wanna understand your take on that and how you struggled with that, or what your girlfriends say about that, or your feelings around that.
Well, I mean, I think to back up a little bit, how I define emotional intelligence is a little bit different in my experience. I've started what I would call my emotional intelligence journey about 10 or 11 years ago. Sure, going into that, I had some level of base level regulation, just learning how to function in society. But I think the biggest change for me in my experience of therapy was really tapping into the physical emotion in my body, learning to not just say I'm mad or I'm angry, to really tap into what the layers below anger, frustration are, and to really get down into the inner child and learn what she's saying, what's the core wound being identified here, and then what do I need to say to my little girl, my person. So it's like those layers. Maybe that's what you're considering advanced emotional. I don't know which category you would put that in.
I would put that in emotional integrity, right? So emotional integrity is like, I know what I feel, and it's like I can name it, but that's just the surface level of emotional integrity.
But I think like a lot of people don't know what they feel. I know when I went into therapy 10 years ago, my therapist would describe me as riddled with anxiety. She would ask me how I felt. She would ask me about my childhood, and I just gave my childhood was really great, and I'm not feeling anything right now. But she could see that there was something that was being swallowed and suppressed, and I think I would say that is kind of similar to what I would classify the majority of the population is doing with their emotions. They may not be able to even express what they are, identify that they're happening, or know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And then how to handle the truth of what's going on deep down inside.
Yeah.
And those skills are what I define as emotional intelligence.
I think actually we're in perfect agreement here. I think it's a brilliant way to say it, and to me the skill is emotional integrity, but it's not a skill most people have right away. So to me, I would go, what your therapist is doing there is trying to first get you, like a component of emotional integrity, like actually knowing what you feel and sitting in that feeling, is becoming aware that you're feeling in the first place. And the way you do that is, you described it perfectly. You start dropping down into, okay, where is this, whatever I'm feeling? You don't label it yet, right? Because you may not be aware or understand what it is. You just go, I have a feeling. Okay, well, stop right there. Where is it? Oh, well, it's in my solar plexus. Okay, we can give it dimension. Like one of the things you might do is say, well, what color is it? What texture is it? What personality does it have? And out of that understanding and exploration of dimensionalizing your emotion, you then go, oh, okay, this is X. And once you label it, that's the integrity. And then the integrity is, okay, I can't just run away from this. I have to acknowledge it first. Just like someone walking into a room, right? It's all, your emotion walks into the room, and what we do is try to avoid it. And it's standing over there in the corner. And what you want to do is go, oh, hey, anger, hey, anxiety. I see you there, and I know where you are, and I'm going to acknowledge you, and I'm going to address you.
And I would say that the majority of the population doesn't even know that that figure is standing in the corner. Like, it's that numbed out.
Yes.
And so for me, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about emotional intelligence, is this awareness of really what's going on in the emotional body.
You take it one step further, though, right? And I would say you're one of the most emotionally aware and intelligent people I know. And here's absolutely, and I'll explain to you why. Here's the reason. Once you get in touch with all your own stuff, you have an uncanny ability when someone else walks into the room. And by the way, it's a requirement first to get all those stages yourself, to understand the emotions in you and how you're feeling. Then when someone else comes in the room, to pick up on their emotional state. There's been several times where I'm like, just doing my thing. No one else would necessarily know. I'm acting, quote, normal. And you're like, are you okay? Right? And you do
but
this.
Is that emotional intelligence, or is that rooted in hypervigilance, or is it my psychic ability, or somewhere in between?
I think psychic ability, when we talk about psychic ability and intuition and that kind of stuff.
Attunement.
Yeah, I think that is to me the definition of emotional intelligence.
So are you then going to link emotion and energy? Because how do you differentiate the two?
Actually,
they're the same.
Emotion is energy in motion, right? And so, like, literally, you're picking that up. And we are now, the science, quantum metabolism, quantum biology, now we're actually seeing that we are giving off an electromagnetic field from our heart that extends 6 feet off the body. So right now, yours and my heart fields are intertwined. And so we should be able to pick up on each other's emotional states. We do this, by the way, all the time. Everyone who's ever been to a party or walked into a room where someone's angry, or you can just be like, something's off. You feel it. And it's not just reading the micro expressions on the face. You can feel when someone's off if you are in touch. But the first stage is to get in touch with yourself. I'm gonna go close this door real quick.
Yeah, you're cold. Well, that's why
but I don't know what you think about that.
That's why we have emotional therapy dogs. I know, like, as June, my dog is sitting right here next to us and just threw the door open in my house. She is not a trained emotional therapy dog, but her attunement to me, obviously she doesn't have the cognitive function to define emotion or to use language to define emotion, but she has an energetic sense that she can listen and hear my breath pattern change, that I may be like getting upset, just the energy that I'm putting off in my physical body. This dog will come from any part of the house. It's like hypersensitive, and come to me and look at me and sit with me if I'm having some sort of emotional response. And she's not trained in that. It's just inherent for her.
Yeah, and actually horses are famous for this too.
Yeah.
So they do equine therapy for this very reason, because horses seem to be able to, and by the way, we give off an electromagnetic field from our heart that's like 6 feet off the body. For a horse, it's like double that.
Really?
And so they are responding to these emotional states. So I would say that when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's out there in the social media sphere and online, people always talking about emotional intelligence, but I'm not so sure they understand what this is. And really, it's about first understanding emotions within yourself. And I do think there's a process of regulation, appropriateness, integrity, vulnerability, and maybe alchemy. But then once you master that within yourself, then you can start understanding what you're picking up from other people. It's happening all the time. It's just that other people's emotions will throw you off. And I think this is what you've talked to me a lot about, where you might have an emotional response as a woman, and that emotional response will throw off your romantic partner. Almost like they can't sit in that emotional response.
It's too uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I've experienced that in a lot of relationships. It's one of the biggest things that I'm desiring in my next partner. And I just feel, I think that's part of emotional intelligence, being able to hold space and not, the 4 agreements, not take things personally, don't make assumptions. I don't even know what the other 2 are. I feel like I have to say all 4 now.
Always be impeccable with your word and always do your best.
So when there's not space for, she's releasing these emotions, I'm not gonna take them personally, this isn't about me, and witnessing that, okay, these emotions are coming out, and once they move through energetically, it's gonna feel better. And sometimes that's all, especially a female partner needs, is just the space to, like, this emotion is coming up in my physical body, I need to express, I need to release physically. Okay, now I feel better. It's the same as, an orgasm. There's an energy, there's a sensitivity, there's a building, and then if you can continue to, like, tune in to that energetic, you're gonna reach climax, and then afterward you have a release, and then you feel better. It's an energetic release.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Actually, it's a really beautiful description of it, because from my perspective, uncomfortable emotions, and all emotions do follow a wave pattern, and the ability to watch the wave build, to surf that wave as it's coming and not get caught up in it, but, like, just observe it, be the watcher and surf it, let it crash and release, knowing that a release is going to come, is a really important component of emotional intelligence. It's this idea of, like, exactly what is emotion? Well, it is energy. And what is the pattern of energy? Energy oftentimes moves in waves. And so emotions do move in waves. It's almost like when people talk about emotionally vomiting, right? It feels like that. There's this building sensation, like I'm gonna throw up, and then I throw up and I get a release, and it's a wave. And then maybe it comes back again. But if you can learn to ride those waves and inquire of that emotion. Here's one thing, and see what you think about this. For me, when I am in a particular emotional state, especially the intense negative ones, I'm not always able to do this, but when I'm able to simply dimensionalize that emotion and go, hey, almost treat it like it's a person, and I begin to dialogue with it. As soon as I do that and say, this has something to teach, it's giving me information, it's having a conversation with me, then it's much easier for me to catch the wave and ride it versus be swept up.
It's a detachment. So, like, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day who was feeling depressed and having, like, a depressive episode, and my first husband died by suicide. And when I have big emotional responses, I had one on Monday with some stuff that was going on in my life. And in those moments, I think about my first husband, and I think, if only he had gotten to the place where he had the skill set to say, oh my gosh, I'm in this, like, big place of overwhelm and this big emotional response. This is the deepest, darkest pain that I've ever felt. And it feels, if you don't have some level of emotional awareness, like you're gonna be here forever. And this is not gonna go away. I can't handle this. But if you can dimensionalize and detach enough from the emotional process and say to yourself, get to the place where you have enough regulation, like, okay, I know this is temporary. I know I'm going to move through this. I know I can do these things, talk to my inner child. I know that I can move this physically through my body. And there is another side of this. The only way out is through, and you will get through. And when you go through the dark, you will have a much lighter experience on the other side. And if he could have made it to that next morning, he would still be here. And just like another example, this friend who I was talking to, going down this emotional spiral of, like, my life is falling apart. I feel like nothing works. I'm striving to do this, and this, and nothing is coming together. And we just walk through the same thing, like, okay, just one, this is temporary. Like the mantra, this is temporary. There is a tomorrow. I'm not going to feel like this forever. It's not biologically physiologically possible to feel like this forever. And there is another side of this, and there is a lesson here. There is it's an inner child wound. What's coming up? How can I identify, talk to it? It's almost like untethered soul or base level meditation, like learning to watch our thoughts and allow them to pass, learning to watch our emotions and allow them to pass, to remain detached in some way.
Yeah. And I'll come back to, I know it's a gross metaphor or analogy, but I'll come back to the feeling of nausea and then vomiting, right? Like, like imagine you're super nauseous and you're vomiting and you've got, like, let's say food poisoning, let's say, and you're vomiting and shitting all over yourself, right? And you're trying to hold that in though. You're not letting it release.
Yeah.
This is what we do with emotions, right? What we do is we go, oh, I'm not going to release this. And what we need to do is release it. And here's what I think people don't understand. We talk about toxins all of the time. To me, and I know this is a controversial statement for a lot of people, the toxic exposure of holding in emotions is way worse than most of the toxins that you're being exposed to in food and everything. And I believe that not because it's a statement of just like, well, this is my opinion. It's because I came to that opinion working with clients over 30 years where I go, it's the stress and the emotional toxicity that you are putting on yourself in regard to all the things you think that are killing you. That's actually the worst piece here. We do not know how to move these emotions through us. And until we learn, we will not realize full health.
There's a doctor that I see in Atlanta, Dr. Garcia, amazing man. And there's a book that he gave my mother a long time ago, and I have it somewhere up on my bookshelf. Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And I'd have to look up the author. It's the same concept, and I think about my father who died of pancreatic cancer, basically. And he's a business owner, and there was no emotional processing. Everything was stored inside. And I would venture to say, and you would be able to back me up on studies versus not, that the cancer epidemic is largely related to our inability as a culture to process emotions and our lack of education in it. And I mean, we also have an anxiety and a depression epidemic in our culture. And all of those I feel like are tied together. Scientifically,
it is a highly controversial statement, but I believe that with all my heart after being in medicine and functional medicine for 30 years. So while it's controversial and we don't have any science that essentially says that, although we're starting to get mechanisms to explain what's happening here.
There was a new study that just came out related to this the other day. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I will tell you this though, and if we just go, let's just take stress, because it's hard for science to go, let's study, anger, because anger has many different shades. But if we just have this general umbrella of stress, stress being all of the things, anger, frustration, anxiety, insecurity,
repressed emotion,
all of those things, stress is highly correlated with all ailments, heart disease, cancer, etc. And so to me, if you're someone who's like, I want, anti-aging, and I want to, be healthier, and I want to biohack, I'm like, honestly, you can biohack all your physical stuff, but biohacking your emotions may be the most important thing. I'm convinced it is.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I would go as far to say, because I love to challenge the definitions of words, as we're sort of doing here. Define stress. I mean, is stress not the physical response in your body to repressed emotion?
Well, here's what it is. The scientific definition would be like, stress is anything that throws your body out of homeostasis or balance. So now think about which an emotion, an emotion you get stuck in is. And that, to me, here's the distinction I would make. Emotions are meant to be felt, not lived. So as soon as you start living in an emotion of anxiety or overwhelm or frustration or anger, now you are in stress. Now you are stuck in an emotion. Now you are out of balance, out of homeostasis. And it does not matter. And by the way, this correlates to things like heart rate variability and things like that we can measure. It correlates directly to that. And so Yes. So yeah.
I'm an addict.
Yeah. So like, measuring on, for those who don't know, measuring on your Oura Ring or your Apple Watch or any of those kinds of things.
And my 8 sleep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it's highly, highly correlated. Now let's go into this a little bit more if you want, into this this relationship dynamic, because what I would say the complaint is, and I will push back on this, and I know not a lot of people are having this conversation, the narrative in the internet space is women are good with emotions, men are not. And I go like this: men have mastered things like regulation and appropriateness, I think, a little bit more than women have, whereas women have mastered things like integrity and vulnerability a little bit more. And I know this irks women because the narrative is that, women want to have this, this thing where we master emotions. And I think not. I actually think our culture has made it so that men don't typically express vulnerability, don't typically know how they feel, but they're so good at appropriateness and regulation that they get stuck there. But I also think women are not very good with appropriateness and regulation.
I think the female perspective is that men suppress their emotions. They don't know what they're feeling. They don't know what's going on inside emotionally.
Yeah, and I think that is absolutely
because
true.
They're taught that, boys don't cry.
And I also think I don't disagree with that at all. I also think, to push back against this narrative, is that I also think women can be, the gross generalization is that they are overly expressive and oftentimes will hijack the room with their emotions. And this is really, I know, and this is really tough, I think, for men. So now imagine this. Just imagine for a minute, you're a man who has been told regulate and know when to appropriately release your emotions, and you're so wound up that way that you've never actually stopped to think what you feel. You just know anything you feel, I'm going to regulate it and not express it. And then all of a sudden, your partner comes into the room with so much irregulation and so much vulnerability and so much emotion that can overwhelm
It's almost
somebody.
The shadow.
100%.
And the projection of and that's why so much of one of the female core wounds is you are too much. Oh my gosh, this emotion is a lot. I feel overwhelmed. I want to disassociate. I don't know what to do with this. I feel very uncomfortable. It's touching emotions inside of me that I don't even know what they are. You stay over there and I'm going to stay over here.
100%. And here's the thing that I would say to men and
what
women.
The fuck?
Women, when they hear that,
tune in.
Should hear, can we please have some emotional regulation and appropriateness? And men should hear, can you please get in touch with what you're actually feeling and express it?
And that's what women are
and
feel
meet
like
halfway.
are saying. Yeah.
And meet halfway.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if you're a man who has a woman who is constantly complaining about the fact that you're not emotionally available, the reason you're not is because you are locked in regulation and emotional appropriateness, and you have never learned to actually identify and feel and express. On the other side, if you're a woman who's being told that you're too much all the time, you would have to look and see. If you're truly emotionally intelligent, you would have to go, okay, maybe I need to know when it's appropriate and regulate this a little bit. Because intelligence is this: when you go into a social room, you don't just go, let's say we're all in a social environment and you're not in a good mood. You don't come into the room and project that, right? You regulate. You go, what's the context? What can I express? What can I express? If I'm with good friends, maybe I can express that mood. But if I'm with strangers, I don't. That's regulation. Same thing here. If you walk in, you got to look at the context of what's going on and then you express, right? And I think this is oftentimes missed. So to me, isn't that a key component of emotional intelligence?
Well, this brings up for me, as you give that example, this concept I've been playing with my friends, which is, what we do as a culture is we say, hey, how are you? How are you? And I love what I'm developing with my friends, which is sometimes I'll make the joke, would you like the concise or the comprehensive answer? Because we are trained to just say, how are you? And it's oh yeah, I'm good, how are you? Which is not authentic and not genuine in what our actual experience is and not actually how we are. And so I've been spending a lot of time about this idea that we shift and regulate our emotional experience as human beings based off of what feels comfortable for other people. And how do you reconcile the two and find balance? And, am I going to go out in public in the grocery store and someone says, how are you? And I'm like, well, I'm actually having a really terrible day. My toddler just had a tantrum. I'm bleeding like a sieve, and I'm starving, and I just got in a fight with my partner, whatever. No, I'm going to say, I'm okay. How are you? Nice to see you. Have a wonderful day. But if it's someone who I know and love and trust, it's going to be an authentic answer if we have the time for it.
100%. I think that's exactly how we should be looking at this. I also just think that we have to always, and this is the thing, like, to me, like, my definition of an asshole is somebody who hijacks rooms with their inconvenience and their emotions. An asshole is somebody
inconsiderate.
They're and they just go, what I'm feeling is most important here. I think emotional intelligence says, I am feeling something. I do have these things. Is it appropriate to express this now? Now, also, it goes both ways. Now, the other thing is, if you're too like, well, I'm not going to express it ever because it's never appropriate, that's a problem. But there is as you like to say, the truth is always in the middle. There is a balance. Intelligence is about reading rooms. It's about reading your partner. It's about reading your friends. We don't think about it. We don't like any friend that every time we talk to them, they just unload all kinds of emotions on us. Nobody likes that. And so what we have to do in romantic relationships is realize that if I'm constantly unloading my emotional stuff in rooms, then that is a big burden on the partner. Now, at the same time, if I'm never speaking my emotional state, that's a big burden on the other partner. And so emotional intelligence to me means understand all of these aspects. Now, imagine if we had a class, emotions 101 in college that was like appropriateness, regulation, integrity, vulnerability, alchemy,
Which are, by the way, in college, when I took psych, the first couple of versions, there was no mention of any of this, by the way, when we're learning about the human brain and our psychology.
Well, what's funny about this? People, when I have this conversation about emotions, people are like, where did you get that? What's the what book? What? And I'm like, unfortunately, there is no book. This is just put together from research looking at emotions. That we have such little resources to learn about emotion. So I have people ask me, they're like, do you have an article on that? Because people are like hungry for understanding these different emotional states. Emotions, I think, are, and rightly so, in science, they're one of the least studied things. And the reason why is because they're so amorphous.
Yeah, well, it's less tactile.
But they are starting to do some really, I don't know if you want to get into this, but they are starting to do some pretty cool studies where they're doing things like, let's look at heart rate variability, let's look at certain brainwave states, and let's correlate that with certain emotions. And you will see they are getting, anger has a certain heart rate variability response, a certain brainwave state, and we are starting to study the signatures of certain emotions.
Well, I love, because I'm a data whore and I want to contribute to the data collection of this company, I love what Aura Ring is doing, and I would pay big fucking money to be able to go behind the scenes and see what data they're collecting, because they've got all these tags that's going on, and they're tracking your heart rate, they're tracking your HRV, they're tracking your sleep, and you can go in and tag what's going on, like, which I've been tagging. I had a back injury, or if I'm angry, they know where I'm at in my menstrual cycle. They know what day of my menstrual cycle. They know my basal body temperature. And I can see my heart rate, or my heart rate variability for me is one of the biggest things I pay attention to. And I can see when my body is in a really physically stressed place, and when I'm more susceptible to getting sick.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I think they must be doing something. And I think they're linked up with a university. I saw in one of the posts that they made.
Yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff. And now with AI, we'll be able to begin to unpack this. But, and maybe another thing to talk about with emotions that I think is useful, especially in partnerships, is that I think what a lot of people also don't know, that emotions are linked to stories. They're linked to things that we beliefs and stories. And by the way, it goes both ways. So I often tell my patients and clients, like, if you're feeling an emotion, I want to go, what was the story you were just telling yourself prior to that?
Yeah.
It also works the other way. Like, oftentimes you'll feel an emotion and you don't know what you'll look around in the environment to explain it. And actually the science of this is really interesting. They go, before, let's say you see a bear, right? Because you're out here in the woods in Nashville, so sometimes you see bears and you're around. What will happen is, if you see a bear, you see that bear, and let's say it's close to you, you feel this emotional response, maybe this fight or flight response, and then your brain catches up and goes, what's happening here? Oh, there's a bear. Should I run? Should I stay? What should I do? And if you really get in touch with your emotions, what you'll find is that something will appear, and you'll have this whole story like that goes through your mind, and then you decide how to respond to the emotion. So part of emotional intelligence also is slowing down as much as you can, becoming aware of the emotion and going, what is the story that I'm telling? And could I tell a different story to elicit a different emotion? Like, for example, we know that the response of being in love with somebody, right? Like, if you're going to get intimate with somebody, it feels like stress, sweaty palms, heart racing, but the context is different versus, okay, I see a wild animal, same physiological response, different context.
Yeah, there's a couple places we could go from that. I guess what you just said brings me into this thing that I've been trying to decode in my own life. Because when we're attracted to somebody, there's an energetic that we're attracted to. And sometimes, especially early on in our emotional intelligence journey, or lack thereof, it's an energy that's familiar, that can be related to a core wound. So in my experience, being out in the world and dating, if and when I have a physical, like, nervous system response, sweating palms, sweating armpits, not able to think clearly, elevated heart rate, there are some people who would make the argument that there's an energetic there that I've come to identify in my emotional intelligence journey that isn't safe for me, although I may still be attracted to it. But maybe this physical response in my body is like, hey, don't fuck with this energy. And then when you're in the middle of that, there's like a decoding later on, like, okay, this falling in love experience feels very different. I'm not having that physical reaction in my body because I've come to this place in my emotional intelligence journey. And I don't know what the science behind that is either.
Well, I have an analogy for this to see if you like it. It's like, so if you imagine two roads, right? You're at a crossroads, and let's say you're dating and you have all your patterns and all this stuff, and you're trying to change. You want a different outcome in your next relationship. Here's what will happen. There's two roads you could follow. One starts out familiar and gets frustrating very quickly. The other starts out foreign and kind of a little bit fearful, but then gets to this place of fun and enlightenment. So one is familiar and frustrating, and one is foreign and fearful, but then turns into fun. And so what happens is the response is kind of the same in the beginning, and then what will happen is, as you take that familiar path, it turns frustrating because all the same patterns start coming up.
Totally.
And the other one starts out fearful, so you'll have the same response, but then all of a sudden the patterns look different. Instead of the same old emotions, there's new emotions. And I think this is another component of emotional intelligence. When you're stuck in the same emotions over and over again, and people bring those emotions out in you, by the way, they're your emotions and they are your responsibility. However, there are contexts and people who can make it easier for you to switch out of those emotional states. And that's what we should be looking for. Is it easier for me to break this emotional pattern with this person, or is it the same old? Is it even harder?
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to take this into the woo side of things and go into the astrology. There is a karma, especially in relationship dynamics for most of us, that we're born into our lives with. There's a soul destiny karma. And there, from an astrology perspective, you have a north node and a south node. And for the most part, you are going to be attracted to the polar opposite of those nodes, which is your karma relationship from a relationship standpoint, until you learn the lesson that it is that you need to learn. And you will repeat this over and over in your lifetimes, relationship after relationship, or lifetime after lifetime, until it fully changes. And, I think what we're talking about here is directly related to that. It's this energetic that a lot of times it's a parental figure. It's a father or a mother wound, whatever those are. And we're attracted to that. People talk about you marry your father, you marry your mother, depending on what sex you are. And we're attracted to, as a woman, say the male, the wound that we have from our father in another man. And I know I said it in yesterday's podcast. I married my father wound in my first marriage, then I married my mother wound in my second marriage.
Yeah, and another way to say that is to say, I married my old patterns, and I couldn't escape them. And so the next piece of this is, by the way, they're meant to teach us. So the idea is the fact that you were, and here's an interesting way to look at it, the fact that the pendulum did swing, because most people go, I married my father, then I married my father again, then I married my father again, right? What happened with you is I married my father, then I married my mother. And what that shows me is that you are actually moving, right? So you're trying things on. You actually are not repeating the patterns. You went from one familiar pattern to a new familiar pattern, but there is movement there. I get more concerned when I'm like, oh, you married your father. Oh, then you married your father. Oh, then you married your father, right? Like that's more of an issue.
Well, yeah, it's just like anything else in the emotional intelligence journey. Like every challenge that you're faced with, every issue in your life, whether it's relating with people or it's your work, whatever, it's an opportunity to learn something. And you're going to be faced with that challenge, whether it's your work life, your relational life, over and over and over again until you learn the fucking lesson. So it's learning to ask the question every time you're faced with something, which is, okay, what's the lesson here? Has this happened before? Is this a pattern? What's the lesson here? What do I need to know that I'm not picking up on?
It does seem to be a universal truth that you are destined to repeat these patterns until you figure it out. And another way I think we could conceptualize emotions, I like to think about them as, let's call it the GPS of your spirit or the GPS of your soul. They tell you, especially when you're stuck in certain emotions, they tell you where you are on the map of spiritual development. And so they are useful. They're giving you information, right? I'm in this neighborhood in this city, right? So I'm in anger, city, and I'm square on the, corner of bitterness and pissed off.
Yeah.
And if I want to move from that, right, I have to go, okay, now let me go and, look at another emotion. Like, for example, from my perspective, emotions have depth and charge. So like depression is a very low emotional state. It's a dirty city. It's a dark city. Yeah. And as we move out of that, we go into insecurity. It's a little bit lighter. Then as we move out of that, we go into, anxiety, right? It's starting to be like, okay, so now, it's got a little bit more of a charge. Then we go into like frustration, and we go into resistance, and then into anger. And then eventually we get out of those dirty cities and move into, gratitude and acceptance. And we start living in these states for longer periods of time. And I think people need to understand that these are accessible to us. Well, yes, sure, I feel anxiety and depression, but I am in gratitude most of the time. Like, I don't walk through my life looking for problems most of the time now, whereas I did before, or looking for things to fix. I walk around going, I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that we get to do this. And that changes the way that the world shows up for you.
Yeah. Well, I think to go back to the woo, to counter you in that with another language and another way of saying that is, it's a frequency. You're moving energetically through frequencies. And for me, as a very visual person, and this kind of touches on some of the psychedelic healing ceremonies that I've had, there are colors that I see, especially when in meditation. and there's a color scale of frequency, and you could probably take that color scale and write out these emotions that you're talking about in this order, and the highest level of frequency is purple. And so I can really judge where I'm at in my physical, spiritual body based off of what color it is I'm seeing in meditation. And it is 100% directly connected to the order of operations that you're talking about.
Yeah. Actually, if this I love, because this is the artist in you, and I love getting this perspective for you. And you know what's really interesting?
But it's actually scientific. Like, there's a quantum element of this. Like, it's not just made up.
100%.
I can't speak to what it is because that's not my brain, but 100%. I know you probably can.
Well, but here's an interesting thing. I want to get your take on this.
Color therapy.
I want to get your take on this because as a designer, right? Like, so you've been my designer, and I love your work. Like, you design spaces, so you're very in touch with colors and what they do. I was very drawn to, for the longest time, blacks and reds.
Me
and
too.
then charcoals and orange.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like greens and purples and like more, and it's like, that's interesting. It's a very interesting thing. Like, I'm more drawn to that. Even when I used to, if I go back to my first businesses and did my branding, you would see like orange and charcoal, black and red, and now you'll see. Then it went to green, and now you'll see like, purples, indigo.
Yeah, green and blue are, I believe, and I wish I had my phone so I could Google it, are right below purple.
Yeah, it's basically, if you look,
Which
well, if you look at the chakras,
in green and blue.
Yeah.
But I really don't love the color purple. Let's be honest. Like, most people who have this understanding, their yoga mat will be blue or purple and da 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 da. I can't with the purple.
Yeah.
Call somebody if I start painting rooms purple. And if I do, it's going to be a deep, dark, moody purple in like a dark cave of a room. But there is going to, I don't like purple.
Well, I have this goes to another theory I have, to really, I know we're going, like, I love this because we're going very deep in emotional intelligence, but I also have this theory that as humans, as energetic bodies, right? Like, if you look at the chakras, which if you look at the chakras, it goes
Their
red,
colors.
It goes orange, it goes yellow, it goes green to the heart, it goes blue here. Right?
It's the same color order.
Yep, and then it's purple. But here's the interesting thing. Part of the reason I think that some people may have issues with some of these colors, they are intense. And I also think that as our energetic body has to be prepared to handle certain energetic frequencies and certain emotional frequencies. So we all know, everyone listening to this right now knows somebody who is stuck in a low energy frequency. And when those people encounter these very high vibe people who are very grateful, like, I find this a lot, like with my mom, me, like, we're very complimentary, we're very grateful, we look around, we can make lower vibe people, or people stuck down below in energy and anxiety and depression, we can make them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because that energy state is hard for them to access, and so it makes them go,
it's repelling.
I don't like this person, it's too much. It feels fake, or it feels whatever they do. And I oftentimes look at that and go, isn't that interesting? So I also think this is why some of these colors are a lot for us.
Well, I wouldn't make the argument that I don't like purple because I don't have access to that level of enlightenment, because I certainly do.
Is that what you heard?
But I mean, because I'm thinking about spaces and creating spaces, like, and the colors that I use thus far are not on this basic color scale. But what it does bring up for me, and I know we don't want to go too far off here, to kind of tie it back, in my two ceremonial psychedelic experiences, and we both have seen the same person, I had very different color experiences, two different mushrooms. I don't know if we're gonna admit that, but yes, psilocybin.
Yeah, of course we're gonna admit that.
Like, my second one was all about, like, there was childhood sexual trauma that was moved. There was softening into the feminine, and the colors were very primary, and it was like disgusting to me. Because I'm such a visual person, I hated the visual experience that I was getting. It was red, like red, primary colors, blue, yellow, almost like a 90s childhood classroom. And I hated it. Whereas my first experience when I was 6-8 weeks postpartum, something like that, was a different frequency of psilocybin and was so mystical and angelic and light and sparkly. But tying it back to moving emotion in our physical body, one of the things I really learned from our dear friend Susanna in those ceremonies, because you get a level of attunement when you go into that frequency in not just to color, but to all types of energy. And the way she attuned with me and could tap into my energy and identify it in my physical body, and then us using vibration and sound and yelling and screaming to physically move that energetic entity out of my body, which is also emotion. And I know we were talking
100%.
about this last night. Like, I've never screamed like that in my life. I've never like vomited out literally and had a visual imagery of this thing that I was moving out of my body. So that was another layer for me in my emotional intelligence journey of like recognizing how energetically based emotion is and things I can do to detach from it and move it out of my body, whether it's physical exercise, meditation, breath work, yoga, going for a walk, screaming, or doing a voice memo. Sometimes I record my own voice memos as like a voice memo diary just to like process and get something out.
Yeah, and actually this, again, is a fascinating area, and sound is our greatest access to this. So we all know the Om, and if you listen to, I know people have heard this, but it is such a powerful thing when you listen to some of these monks or you really understand what you're doing. There's a guttural sound in the beginning, and then it comes up the body, and then it lands in the head. And that is, so all of that is important. I also would say when we listen to, like for me, for example, my friend was like, why do you listen to like angry rap music when you work out? And I'm like, because I'm trying to get to that core sort of anger sort of emotion, and I like bringing it up and changing it. And as soon as the workout changes, he laughs at me because I'll put on like 528 hertz, and it's like right away, right after I finish, I go from this like banging, like boom, 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 like almost like war-like music, and then I go into like this floaty, like like right away, and he's like, and then when I'm in the sauna, I put that music on, and so I use music to also tap into these emotional
to move
states.
Emotion. In my last marriage, we joked with my friends, like I drive the silent model. I would process in silence, and I never played music in my car. I felt incredibly overstimulated. I was also a mom of a young child, and I don't know what it was. I had a disconnection, but I stopped using, maybe it was related to the trauma that I experienced in my first marriage of him dying by suicide. I almost started avoiding music, I think, because it was bringing me to this place emotionally that I didn't want to go or didn't have space for. So post my second marriage, I've started using music again to move energy and move emotion. And it's just energy and motion. Yeah.
I love that thought, and actually I've been writing a lot lately on music and sound, and what we now know is that DNA is responding to this sound. These molecules, we used to think, for those of you who are interested in science, we don't have to go into this, but we used to think, like I'm trained as a biochemist, that's my degree. So we used to think these enzyme systems worked in lock and key manners. Now we actually know that they're actually working in vibration. And the water around that surrounds all these molecules are vibrating and creating these coherent domains that are moving these molecules into like a dance so that they can interact. So in a sense, our whole physiology is music. And in a sense, it's
all frequency, it's all vibration.
Yeah, if you've ever thrown like a rock into a pond and seen those ripples, imagine when you create an emotion in your body that those ripples are going in your body. Now also imagine
on a cellular level.
Yes, now imagine my heart is rippling out to you, and your heart is rippling out to me. Now, if I can't be emotionally solid within myself, and I don't know that that music,
Yeah.
I can't hear your music or respond to it appropriately. And so as a partner, you feel left out. Also, though, if you're someone who is like latching on and being like, I need you to soften my music, it's too loud for me.
Yeah.
That also is a problem. So in partnership, I think we have to realize it's almost like tuning.
This energetic match of like, are our frequencies in alignment?
Yes.
Which you've seen that thing going around on social media where they use tuning forks or something similar that plays one hertz and the other one doesn't move. There's two next to each other. And then when you get the two tuning forks that are tuned to the same hertz, and you hit one and the other one just immediately, and then they start going together.
This is exactly it. And by the way, this is why, like, let's say you and I are in a relationship and you're you're in it. You're in like the dark place or the angry place or whatever. You're frustrated.
Yeah.
So you're in, like you could see it as like you're almost in the heavy metal or gangster rap place. Now I could come in and be like, let's do Beethoven. That's not usually going to be the right approach. The right approach is for me to come in and be like, all right, she's playing rap. Let me see how I could play rap with her. Let me see how I can get into heavy metal with her and help her get this through and hold, that, to me, that's what holding space kind of means. It's like, okay, Kelly's in heavy metal. She's in rap right now.
Yeah.
Let me kind of sit there with her and see if I can help her move this rap through her.
Yeah, and is that another layer of emotional intelligence, to have the capacity to take your frequency, see someone who you love's frequency, go there, not go in it with them and be in it and go deeper, but go in, tap in, and then like start to pull out. Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned emotional capacity, because that's the umbrella under which all this sits. As you develop regulation and appropriateness and integrity and vulnerability and alchemy and all these emotional ways, you then have emotional capacity. And now you can walk into a room and all of a sudden people go, I don't know what it is about Kelly. I just like her energetic. And the reason why, because you have a tremendous capacity to be emotionally available to a lot of people. And individuals really like that. And it's not hijacking the room with your emotions. It's actually fitting into the room with your emotions. It's like being an emotional chameleon, where you come in and you go, okay, here's the emotional state in the room. I know what I'm feeling. I can feel what I'm feeling. I can make music here. I could fall into this symphony with these people.
Yeah.
And that is what I think people don't do, because what people don't do is, what most people do is they go like this. Okay, there's music playing in this room. I'm gonna come in and start playing rap music. Like, no, that we were playing country. All of a sudden you're coming in with rap, and that disrupts the room. And if people don't understand that, then they feel constantly like they don't fit in. And it's really an emotional response. They never learned emotional, sort of intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess this brings us back, and I know we need to end here in a second, to a point that I made, like, to talk about my personal experience in the beginning of this conversation, like, to define the difference between, like, the household that I grew up in. I would consider I was born with some genetics of predisposed attunement to the room and other people. I think my father had that, but people would also, and maybe I would as well, make the argument that that attunement was transformed into hypervigilance from an anxiety standpoint, to be able to know what's going on, to read from a survival place. And so with what we're talking about as far as frequencies in a room and how we show up and how we attune and how we adjust, like, how do we separate emotional capacity in the way that we're talking about, and transforming energies in the room, or working with energies in the room and making an orchestra, versus hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance, from my point of view, and this you might push back on.
Kind of like a
but
hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance to me, when I see that, I just go, okay, that's a form of hijacking the room. Because here's the thing, it's like this room is a particular way.
Like that energy is too big and too intense, and that overpowers the other energies.
And yes, and
like when I have 4 cups of coffee.
Yes, and it also changes the perception, where it's kind of like this. You come into a bright room, right? And everyone's happy with that bright room, and you come in here like, this room's too bright, and you put down all the shades.
I don't know if I see it that way.
So hypervigilance, from my perspective, can, not always, because it can be protective, and that's knowing the difference. But hypervigilance can, especially if it's a default state.
Protective of the individual?
Protective of the
The
people.
person who has the hypervigilance, if it's protective of themselves versus...
That's the difference. That's the difference I'm trying to make, is that hypervigilance that is always, when it's the default state, remember, emotions are meant to be felt, not lived.
Yeah.
So when someone lives in hypervigilance all the time, what that tells me is they are needing in control and power because they're afraid, and they tend to default to that position.
Yeah.
However, hypervigilance that is not lived in but can be accessed is usually protecting other people. It's looking around and going, and you probably are now getting familiar with this because you have a kid, right? So there's a difference probably in your hypervigilance when you're worried about your child versus yourself. But I would say people who are hypervigilant are usually, in our society, hijack rooms, and it's one of the reasons why people can be turned off by that, because they're just like, there's nothing wrong in this room, and you just made something wrong in this room. And that can oftentimes happen in the same way that, you know, people who hijack the room with their depression or hijack the room with, it happens all the time.
Yeah. I love this. I love how we're defining and looking at the greater definition of emotional intelligence, frequency, vibration, transforming energy, and showing up as humans. I think it's a really beautiful way to combine talking about it from a scientific sense and then more of a spiritual woo perspective, as we tend to do.
Yeah, I love it too. I know you have got to go.
I got to
soon.
get to yoga.
You got to get to yoga so you can, that's another
I
thing.
got to transform all this coffee into like, bring it up, and then I'm going to bring it down, and I'm going to sweat my ass off, 110 degrees, detox, move some physical things through my body.
Yeah, and I guess we can end on that because that's another thing that we didn't touch on, but physically moving while you're expressing emotions is one of the powerful things we can do.
Yeah, 100%, and it is my, one of my, a need. It is a need that I have to have that regularly, and I really do. Even if I go 2 days without my spiritual practice of yoga, breath work, meditation, I feel the buildup of energetics. My patience runs thin. I don't sleep as well. I get a little more irritable. It doesn't matter where I'm at in my menstrual cycle. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for this. I love this conversation.
Yeah, I loved it too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.